Hello everyone, and finally, welcome back to another video on the channel. Today, we'll be taking a visit to the now abandoned Mossman Mill network with photos taken late last year showcasing the mill's assets prior to being sold off at auction and track work already having become quite overgrown despite Mossman's last cane season only ending the year prior in 2023. For those unaware, Mossman Mill was a sugarcane crushing mill opened in 1897, located in the town of Mossman, Queensland in Australia, and had its last sugarcane season in 2023, with closure announced in early 2024. The mill operated a roughly 60-kilometre rail network of 610mm or 2-foot gauge, being one of the smaller milling railway networks in Queensland. Its limited size for cane crop, poor weather, and financial loss over the modern period unfortunately eventually resulted in its closure. This video will cover the events leading up to its closure, many pictures I took of many corners of the Mossman Mill rail network in October 2024, and what will come after for the mill alongside its railway and cane farmers. Without further ado, let's begin. Welcome to the Cairns Railfan. We begin at the mill itself, which would usually be a busy area at this time of year. Unsurprisingly, the mill is located in the central position of the rail network and was the heart of the surrounding sugarcane fields, with railway lines branching off south or northwards. Trouble for Mossman Mill has unfortunately not been a foreign concept, as even in the 2000s to 2010s, the mill was struggling and has gone through other milling companies located in Queensland, such as Mackay Sugar, who acquired the mill around 2012 and were already selling off the mill by 2018 after only having ownership for a measly 6 years. After this, the locally owned group Far Northern Milling was formed to operate the mill until its recent demise that it could not come back from. To put into perspective, most sugar mills in Queensland require 1 million tonnes of cane crushed within the 6-month June to December season to turn some kind of a profit. In 2023, Mossman couldn't even crack half of that, and had only managed to crush around 350,000 to 400,000 tonnes. By October 2024, an auction for the mill's assets and railway rolling stock had been set up and was being advertised in the mill yard. Mossman's 7 operational diesel locomotives were up for grabs, alongside maintenance rolling stock and derelict locomotives that had been scrapped. The company MSF Sugar ended up winning this auction and transferred the rolling stock to their Marillion storage shed on the South Johnson Mill network surrounding Innisfail. I will cover this in more detail towards the end of the video. It, however, wasn't just railway rolling stock up for sale, but also lots of road-related vehicles Mossman utilised with truck trailers all over the area. Trucking was a large part of Mossman's operations, as their special cane bins, utilised nowhere else in Queensland, could be slid on and off truck trailers due to the sugarcane wagons actually being a flatbed variety rather than having the bin fixed to their frame. A loss of a large part of these trucking operations in 2023 were a major blow to Mossman's cane crushing totals, as they relied on lots of cane being trucked down from the nearby inland mountainous Tableland region, and it was loaded onto the rail once down to the coast. This was originally a source of controversy, as this took lots of cane away from the truck-run Tableland mill, owned by MSF Sugar, and by 2023, it seems that MSF Sugar had won the Tableland's growers over to their mill, with the Casawary road rail loading point being absurdly quiet for most of the season, when in previous seasons, it was a bustling area of constant activity coming from the Tablelands. This clearly dealt a blow to Mossman's cane intake. Smaller items could also be found around the mill site, such as various pieces of machinery and rail infrastructure like rails, sleepers, and point levers. From memory, I believe these were also up for auction sale. To close off on this part of the video covering the mill itself, the property has been up for sale for quite some time now, and sale by expression of interest was listed as closing on the 20th of March. However, from what I have heard, no EOIs followed through, and so the mill site's future remains uncertain. Going off the history of past mills, it is likely Mossman Mill will entirely be demolished once purchased for scrapping and land development purposes. We now move from the mill. We will start by exploring the railway lines that are north of the sugar mill itself. Heading north and to the east was a short, roughly 3-kilometre line which ended near a suburb development called Bonnie Doon. I never saw trains myself on this line, but it ran through some valley-like areas surrounded by trees and featured a dual rail and road bridge over the South Mossman River. There was a notable siding near the end of the line which was elevated on very tall sleepers. At a guess, I would say this was for cane bin transfers with trucks. Now further north, following what was a sort of northern main line for Mossman Mill, where many lines branched off from, we reach its road crossing at Mossman Daintree Road, which was a junction for the Finley Veil branch. Here, the rail line and sidings remained heavily overgrown, which was a shocking sight considering how just the year prior it would have been busy with Mossman's rail traffic when heading northwards. Next, branching off from that location is the aforementioned Finley Veil branch. The point where it curves off has one of the, at the time, new tractor ramps that were built over quite a few sidings in the Mossman cane farming area in 2024. This is because cane was still being grown since the 2023 season, especially since many farmers expected another season to come the following year. Road transport was organised by Mulgrave Mill of Gordonvale with Braze Transport and received funding from the state government to truck it roughly 100 kilometres south by road from areas around Mossman for crushing at Mulgrave. Up at Mossman, these saw these roughly built dirt ramps constructed so haulouts could drive up the ramps and be at an adequate height for tipping their loads of cane into the truck trailers, often riding at a higher height than the former rail cane bins. Moving on from that topic, the Finley Veil branch is about 2.5 kilometres in length and at first travels solely through cane fields before emerging onto Finley Veil Road for a shared rail-to-road crossing to pass the Mossman River. After this, the branch continued mostly alongside the road. Here, there is evidence of potentially flood-caused ballast washouts due to the poor wet weather faced often up in far north Queensland. This is another topic that led to Mossman Mill's demise. However, I will cover it in more detail later down the line. A further 2.5 kilometres north of the Finley Veil branch junction, we find the Golf Links call point near a crossing over Newell Road. Mossman Mill is one of many sugar mills in Queensland that use little to no electronic signalling, and movements were mostly controlled by radio communication to a transport officer. The siding here, now overgrown, had 3 tracks and was a common point where southbound trains would likely have to stop to to wait for northbound trains, as well as being a general call point for updating the transport officer on the location of a southbound train. Just a little ways north was a 3-track siding primarily intended for road rail cane loading and unloading. The entrances to these sidings had become ridiculously overgrown due to the surrounding vegetation creeping onto the railway line. However, I was lucky enough to be around in time at this siding to see Mossman cane growers dumping their cane into trucks for hauling down to Mulgrave utilising the new ramps. Before the trucks arrived, a haul-out driver had spoken to us that during that season the work to get all their crop off in time was absurdly intensive and non-stop due to the fact, because of the haphazard nature of the setup, Bray's Transport was lacking staff for the trucking operations, and so there was very long wait times to wait for the trucks they needed to turn up due to resources being stretched thin to collect cane from all the participating farms in Mossman that year. From there, the main north line travels for 2 kilometers in a straight line, passing a few sidings and junctions along the way before it reaches a branch that heads out to an area called Rocky Point. This 2-kilometer stretch of track is mainly where it escapes from the Mossman area and is now in the area known as Myallo, with various small townships consisting of sheds and housing around the area. Much of the track along this once busy area is also surprisingly submerged beneath vegetation, and on a small offshoot on Shiles Road was a haul-out waiting on one of the truck ramps. I first saw this haul-out while driving past at around 1:30 p.m, and when I passed by again about 2.5 hours later by 4 p.m, the haul-out was still there awaiting a truck, which really puts into perspective the waiting period for some of these haul-outs. From this general location branched off a 2.5-kilometer line which has a large bridge over Saltwater Creek and heads out towards a small township known as Rocky Point. The long straight areas were unsurprisingly beginning to show overgrowth, with the bridge areas and large sidings along the line still being quite visible. A large 4-track siding near the end of the branch showed potential signs of minor ballast washouts, with the concrete sleepers being almost completely exposed, which is unusual for sugarcane railways. A truck ramp could also be seen at the end of the siding. This small branch also had a number of interesting culverts, and I am disappointed I never got to see trains run on this branch. From there, it's a short hop of 1.5 kilometers until passing through the small area of housing where the Myallo State School is located, with the line also crossing Saltwater Creek here. Interestingly, one side of the bridge for Saltwater Creek is heavily overgrown, while the other is practically perfectly visible. Just beyond the bridge is the junction for the Beal branch, which is definitely one of the longer Mossman Mill branch lines, being roughly 5 kilometers in length. This branch for its entire route follows Syndicate Road, making it nice and easy to explore. Due to the nice area that this branch resides in, with the cane fields located in a valley-like area, yet again it's another area I would have loved to film trains operate on. Now it is mostly completely overgrown. Next up, continuing from the junction, is a section of the main line to where it then branches off yet again in the general Beal area, and is the line that goes furthest to where the main township area of Beal is actually located, with the line from the previous junction to the end of the branch being about 4 kilometers long. A small siding offshoot crossing Myallo Bamboo Creek Road before the junction towards Beal itself is the northernmost point I was able to see a Mossman train in my times of visiting. From there, the junction branches off Myallo Bamboo Creek Road and follows Beal Road for a while until heading away from the road, cutting around farmer properties and cane fields. The track condition along here was surprisingly a lot better than what I had seen previously. However, leading up to the terminus of the line is where the line became submerged in vegetation, up until Lombardy Bridge, where the remnants of a shared road-to-rail corridor existed. This would have been paved over before Mossman Mill closed, as this branch actually once went even further towards Beal, but was eventually cut back to a siding just before Lombardy Bridge. From the previous location is the final 2-kilometer stretch of track of the network north of the mill. There was a lot of interesting signage related to the upcoming dual road-to-rail bridge seen before as a common aspect of the mill network, where just before the bridge a ballast washout left a stretch of track hovering above the ground, representing a small example of weather-induced direct damage to the Mossman Mill network. This sort of thing was particularly bad on the Shannon Vale branch south of the mill, which we will be covering shortly. Just after the bridge there was a tiny section of track that had vanished over what must have been a small washed away culvert of some kind, like some of the small wooden ones seen on the Saltwater Creek branch to Rocky Point. Beyond that, the line led up to a crossing of Myallo Bamboo Creek Road with overgrown track and a bridge with plant debris on it. This leads up to the very end of the line where there was an unexpected and interesting bomb-shaped monument commemorating a little-known, very minor Japanese aerial attack on Queensland in World War II. According to the plaque, 8 bombs were dropped just nearby at 3 a.m. on the 31st of July 1942, with only one person from a nearby property receiving a non-fatal injury to the head from shrapnel or debris fragments. This monument was said to have been constructed on the 31st of July 1992, 50 years since the event, being unveiled by the individual known as Carmel, who was the only casualty of the attack. With all the northern lines covered, we can now focus on the lines south of the mill, which, luckily enough for the length of this video, are a lot more streamlined, with there only being 3 main railway lines south of the mill. There is the main south line that heads all the way down to Craigley, just near Port Douglas, and 2 main branches to Shannon Veil and Casawary. We will start with the line to Shannon Veil, where including the length of the main line is roughly 5.5 kilometers from the mill. Just before the junction to the branch is Mossman Mill's main crossing over the Captain Cook Highway, which would have been actively used over the season. Along the Shannon Veil branch are significant ballast washouts and are by far the worst of the sort that I saw exploring the network last year. This leads on to what I was wanting to mention earlier about the weather. Far North Queensland is no stranger to wet weather, but in December of 2023, just after Mossman's final season, Cyclone Jasper hit further north. I won't rehash this subject as I have already gone over it in detail with previous videos on how it affected Mulgrave Mill around Cairns further south. It goes without saying the Mossman area was hit quite hard with flooding events too, leading to bad weather-related damage to many areas of the network, leading to what would have been expensive maintenance costs, which was yet another big blow to the hefty bills Mossman just couldn't take care of, even despite the money they got from the government. Over the whole year though, 2023 was unexpectedly quite wet during the dry season, leading to many periods of the year where Mossman couldn't crush cane regardless due to wet weather shutdowns, as heavy machinery will just get bogged down in the cane fields during those kind of weather conditions. This led to poorer cane quality at times and delayed the rate at Mossman could intake and crush sugarcane, all while the frequent mill shutdowns and restarts being inefficient on their own. The situation with the Tableland's cane during 2023 even played a hand in this as well, since Mossman Mill had the benefit of still being able to crush cane and operate during rainy periods of time around Mossman, as long as it wasn't raining hard in the Tablelands, with dry cane from there being able to keep the mill running if it was coming in at a consistent rate. Not having this rare benefit in 2023 was one of the many nails in the coffin. From the junction to the Shannon Veil branch, it's a short run along the main line again, where shortly after, the junction for the Casawary branch is located, where all the way to the end of the branch from the Shannon Veil junction is a distance of 8 kilometers by rail. The most notable point of the Casawary branch was the large Casawary road-to-rail loading yard, where it was the main location for Mossman cane trucks coming to and from the Tablelands utilising Mossman Mount Molloy Road. They would constantly be coming in and out with empties and fulls, utilising Mossman's unique road-to-rail bin transfer system. As mentioned previously, in 2023, with the road transport to Mossman having stopped, the yard became quiet and empty. However, when I visited the yard, it seems many of the road rail bins had been stored there, where they are now left lying in the sidings that are becoming buried under natural gravel movements, with vegetation beginning to grow into the bins. From there, the accessible parts of the Casawary branch were surprisingly, at the time, still in rather good condition, and it was simply interesting just taking a look at some of the scenery that ran along the rest of the line. From the junction to the Casawary branch, the line just continues straight south to an area below Craigley, about 13 kilometres by rail from the junction to Casawary. The line here mostly follows alongside the Captain Cook Highway and has multiple sidings for nearby cane farms. This is one of the most interesting parts of the abandoned network at the moment, in my opinion, since this line is where multiple rakes of Mossman's unique containers are being stored. Just nearby the junction to Casawary, a few were stored in a siding area there, where at the time it was approaching the moment to vote for the upcoming state elections, and local politicians had used the stationary bins alongside the highway as free billboards to advertise their political parties. Further down this line were multiple rakes of containers, which are unlike the locomotives and maintenance rolling stock, were not being sold off due to their aforementioned incompatibility with the modern standard fixed bin design that other mills use, meaning they are being left to rot in these sidings or to be later stripped apart by scrappers. The railway lines around these sidings were suffering bad overgrowth, and even the bins were starting to succumb to vegetation. As we approach the end of the southern part of the network, a very interesting piece of infrastructure still remains despite having not been used for 2 whole decades now, way before Mossman closed. Here we see a railway crossing over the Captain Cook Highway that has not been utilised since 2005, with a mysterious entry into the mangrove swamps of the area. This was the junction to the 5-kilometre long Ballyhooly Steam Railway that operated from the 1980s up until 2021, utilising heritage sugarcane railway rolling stock, running a unique operation mostly around Port Douglas. While the BHSR operated up until the early 2020s, a small section of track from here to St Crispin Station served as a connection point with the Mossman Mill network, but was abandoned during the mid-2000s, and the fact that the railway crossing still stands here is fascinating. We now reach the final section of the Mossman Mill network that I explored in 2024, where we actually get away from the rail-run part of the Mossman Mill cane catchment area. Some farms south of the Mowbray River, for example, did not have rail links, and used Mossman's trucking transportation to take their cane to rail loading sites. At this particular farm, just south of the river, pedestals for where empty bins would be filled, taken onto a truck and put back onto cane bin flatbeds on the rail network, are located where I was surprised to find a rake of empties that were just left lying here, with plants rapidly growing through them. Just nearby, this farm was also harvesting their cane to be sent south to Mulgrave, with a haul-out loading Tableland mill-style truck cane bins that were lined up along a dirt road for later pickup and transportation south to Gordon Vale by road. Now, by mid-2025, what is the current state of things in regards to Mossman Mill? First of all, as mentioned at the start of the video, it was MSF Sugar who had won the auction for Mossman Mill's locomotive and maintenance rolling stock in late October, and by mid-December the locomotives were being moved down south by road to the Marillion storage shed on the South Johnson Mill network just south of Innisfail. The large storage shed located here is itself a remnant of a now long-gone sugar mill as well. Marillion Mill was located on this site and closed in 2006 after it was hit by severe damage from Cyclone Larry, with the large storage shed being the only prominent remnant of the mill, with many overgrown sidings nearby that were clearly once part of a larger mill yard. I was incredibly lucky to arrive at this location just as 3 Mossman locomotives, Daintree, Habana and Douglas, were being driven by MSF Sugar crews into the shed. At the time, some Mossman stock had already arrived earlier than the 3 locomotives that had just been unloaded onto the South Johnson rail network. Commonwealth Engineering AL Ivy was lying out in the open with removed wheel axles. Maintenance stock such as the spray wagon and spare parts were also abundant, and within the shed was locomotives Forgy and Cook. There was even the old frame of a Mulgrave Mill locomotive, 8 Chiringa, which still works for Mulgrave Mill, but over a decade ago had a nasty accident when a bridge collapsed underneath it, sending it sinking into a creek. Luckily, the crew were not badly injured from the accident. The locomotive was put back into service, but the shell and some components of the locomotive were sold or given to Mossman Mill for potential spare parts purposes. The faded outline of the locomotive's name and number can still be seen on the side of the cab, alongside the old Mulgrave Mill logo that has since been retired around a decade now after MSF Sugar started rebranding Mulgrave Mill locomotives with their own logo stickers. In regards to how the situation with Mossman's locomotives under South Johnson Mill ownership has progressed, MSF Sugar rather quickly decided that most of these locomotives were unnecessary to keep, and it wasn't too long until they were put up for sale again, with the reasoning being surplus to requirements. The only 2 Mossman locomotives MSF Sugar are wanting to keep are Commonwealth Engineering AL Ivy and EM Baldwin and Sons DH28B Daintree. Daintree has actually already had a season debut with South Johnson Mill and is hauling sugarcane for them, with the Far Northern Milling logos replaced with the MSF Sugar logo, a new air conditioning unit on the rear, and a brand new number to go along with the name, this being 28. From what I am aware, Ivy has not made its seasonal debut just yet. In terms of the cane bin rolling stock that has been left on the Mossman network, scrapping of most of the canetaners has begun, where the wagons that we previously saw in the sidings have had their bogie sets taken out, with the wheels presumably being able to be used elsewhere. This has left just the bins themselves lying on or nearby parts of the abandoned network, where they are either being stripped apart entirely or left for nature to reclaim them. Luckily, a few of these bins have been marked for preservation with signs by the Douglas Shire Historical Society. At the mill, most of the rolling stock and vehicles have unsurprisingly moved out. The mill yard is now a barren place that is only an echo of a memory of what once was. Around the mill sheds, a lone maintenance-related wagon has been left behind in a derailed state. There are piles of scrapped pieces of canetaners, with luckily an entire rake of road-to-rail transferable bins being marked for preservation. Speaking of those bins, it seems the scrappers either don't have an interest or have been told to not touch them, as at the Casawary yard, large rakes of these bins still remain there and are just succumbing to vegetation overgrowth. But it is also a possibility that the scrappers haven't gotten around to dealing with them yet. In regards to the road transport of Mossman sugarcane, it is continued into 2025, where the operation has grown more sophisticated, with now a bigger fleet of trucks heading in between Mossman and Gordon Vale, with other upgraded facilities at Mulgrave Mill, such as a brand new truck weighbridge installed for the purposes of accurately weighing the intake of Mossman sugarcane. However, this doesn't mean it may continue for the foreseeable future. It is still a controversial matter, with many issues, as this constant stream of trucks is bad for the road conditions, especially between Port Douglas and Northern Cairns, where work is still taking place to fix damage from Cyclone Jasper, with many areas restricted to one-lane traffic. Some cane farmers also aren't very happy with how things turned out during 2024. The setup last year was very haphazard, with Mulgrave having just about a month to construct and organise an entirely new area of their mill for Mossman cane unloading, and many farmers reported that they had a large amount of leftover cane that could not be crushed, where one farm reported 50% of their crop was unable to be taken to Mulgrave. The current Liberal National Party of Queensland state government that has taken over from the previous Queensland Labor Party since October 2024 is continuing the millions of dollars worth of funding for this road transport, but due to the heavy expenses of the operation, the general public cannot seem to decide on whether continuing to support Mossman cane growers with these operations are worthwhile or not, with many believing that Mossman cane growers should move on and switch to different crops, so it is unclear how sustainable these road transport operations will be going into future seasons. And finally, with that, it's the end of the video. I hope you found this deep dive into the aftermath of the Mossman Mill closure interesting, and I thank you very much to my regular viewers who have been absurdly patient with this video, with it having been a third of a year since my previous upload. Undertaking such a project that relied on a lot of developing and past local information was a lot harder than I expected. The fact that this video is almost entirely voiced over made things even more difficult and lengthy to create, but in a way I am glad it has taken this long, as much of the information in this video was only made available and clear while it was still being created. Without a doubt, there will also be much more developments of the post-Mossman Mill closure situation to come, and we can only wish the best for the local Mossman cane farmers and former mill workers. Anyways, I sincerely hope you enjoyed such a different style of video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time, where the next video should cover the highly unique Mulgrave Mill transfer of Redlinch and Mossman cane with South Johnson Mill at the end of 2024. Goodbye.